Welcome to the celebration of the 30th anniversary of Loretto at the United Nations. Thanks to all of you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Beth Blissman. I currently serve as your United Nations representative for the Loretto Community and the BVMs, the Sisters of Charity of the Blessed Virgin Mary in Dubuque, Iowa. And we are totally excited and deeply grateful to kick off our 30th anniversary year with this celebration at the virtual Loretto Assembly this year. I'm excited to be joined by former UN Representative Sally Dunn, our current Loretto volunteer, Jax Wiedeschnick, and our key advisor, Kathy Wright. Today, as we open our hearts in this time of interwoven crises, we're going to start with a prayer of appreciation for the beauty of Earth. Then share some stories from our past 30 years. We'll share some snippets of history, as well as some more recent highlights, such as the opportunity we had to pivot and move most of our work online, thanks to the COVID pandemic, in order to celebrate the many people who have played a role. We've woven in many voices working for compassionate action in a global context. As we move through 2021 and beyond, through the decade of action before 2030, then of course, hopefully we'll have some time for question and answer at the end. So let's start with a prayer of beauty and appreciation. This video is called A Tribute to All Nations, and it's to the tune of Finlandia.
This is my song, O God of all the nations, a song of peace for lands afar and nigh. This is my home, the
Wasn't that an inspiring prayer? Welcome back. You might recognize this brief timeline from our 2020, summer 2020 virtual presentation at last year's Loretto Assembly, when we were just beginning to explore 3 decades of action, education, and relationship building through Loretto at the UN. We've since expanded upon it and wish to share more history with you now through photos, audio, and personal stories. Let's start with a brief overview of some of the people who have made Loretto at the UN such a huge success. You will hear more about our early representatives throughout the presentation, but you can see them here. The women who laid the groundwork, built the relationships, attended the meetings, and held the space for action and activism. Our first United Nations NGO representative was Pat Canoyer, with Edwin Mary McBride as alternate, and they were followed by Nancy Finneran and Betty Obel. And here are our more recent representatives. The work of Mary Peter Bruce and Sally Dunn left some huge shoes for me to fill. Now we're going to transition over to Kathy Wright, who will tell us the story of how we got this opportunity for global connection off the ground.
Thank you, Beth. And I have to say, it's a privilege to be a part of reviewing the wonderful accomplishments of the UN NGO over these last 30 years. Loretto was going global when sisters were missioned to China in 1922, almost 100 years ago. Based on that experience and others, the 1958 General Assembly called for a resumption of our work in foreign missions, and sisters were missioned to several countries in South America. In 1976, the community created the Third World Experience, and sisters were missioned to a variety of countries across the globe. At the 1976 Assembly, Marion McAvoy noted that it was time for us to internalize our own interdependence and to deepen our understanding of the interdependence of nations, as well as life on our planet. With that inspiration and understanding, Loretto's commitment to such things as human rights, peace, and environmental issues found another source of collaboration in the United Nations. Nancy Finneran and Maureen McCormick participated in the World Conference for Women in 1980, and that became one more impetus for future action. Edwin Mary's attendance at UN briefings in the 1980s and her reports to LCWR and to the Loretto Justice and Peace Team increased Loretto's awareness of the global issues being addressed by the United Nations. Every experience reinforced Loretto's commitment on the global stage. The 1991 Assembly proposal to seek NGO status at the UN for Loretto was enthusiastically approved and became a reality in 1992. At the 1994 Assembly, Pat Canoyer made the following statement: "I see the importance of a Loretto presence as a catalyst for addressing NGO UN relationships with a freedom not available to many NGOs. The freedom results from our relative smallness, the stability and credibility of our being a recognized religious group already known to some other NGOs and delegates, our ease of operation freed from many layers of bureaucracy, the clear positions of the community in areas of justice and peace, the expertise available from our committees and individual members in special areas, and the ready access to our president and executive committee when consultation is necessary." Pat Canoyer, already a dedicated activist on women's issues, brought a contagious energy and excitement to everyone she worked with as Loretto's first UN NGO representative. Pat knew how to leverage Loretto's gifts to enhance the work at the UN. Our small size was an advantage, and the representative was given a high degree of autonomy, which provided the ability to respond quickly on issues of peace and justice that Loretto had already identified and made a commitment to take action on. Pat knew so many people in the community and could easily tap into needed expertise from leadership, committees, and individual members. Loretto's work at the UN connected with Loretto's committee and LWN work on several issues, such as disarmament, women's rights, and peace. As a member of the Loretto Investment Committee, I knew the UN work on a global scale mirrored the work we were doing in the US on such issues as apartheid, maquiladoras, weapons manufacturing, and global arms sales. I loved it when Pat said, as I stepped out of the US territory each day, entering the UN building, I felt that my UN pass was a true passport to the wider world.
Did you think it was important for Loretto to be at the UN?
Oh, I think it was important both for Loretto and for the UN, because we were at a point where we could say, let's go global. So for a year, we wore buttons that said going global. I'll tell you the first highlight I remember. I got off the bus and I was walking down First Avenue where the UN is and all the flags and all this. And I met a worker. He said to me with tears in his eyes, he said, I'm working on a building there that is dedicated to peace. And I thought, to the smallest worker, the individual worker, that meant so much. We needed the broadening, but the United Nations needed us.
Loretto's status as an NGO was perfectly timed to participate in the efforts begun in 1992 at the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. The primary objective of the Earth Summit was to produce a new blueprint for international action on environmental and development issues that would help guide international cooperation and development policy in the 21st century. By the year 2000, 189 countries had agreed to achieve the goal of sustainable development via the Millennial Development Goals. The MDGs were developed with a target completion date of 2015. And today, we are meeting right after the conclusion of the COP26 meeting in Scotland, not to celebrate the achievement of the MDGs, but to redouble our efforts. Loretto and the UN are as committed to sustainable development and fighting climate change as we were in 1992, despite the delays and setbacks, and because of the even more compelling global need today. Our work, especially for women and children, to provide education for girls, empower women, ensure environmental sustainability, and create global partnerships continues at the UN, across the US and at the border, in Pakistan, in Ghana, and in Guatemala. Loretto has known hardship and setbacks, and our stance at the foot of the cross makes us tireless advocates for these issues. If we shift our focus from ecological issues to women's issues, we will see that we have a parallel situation. We and the UN know what is needed to create the just, peaceful, and equal world that we envision. The 1994 Platform for Action states that the full implementation of the human rights of women and the girl child as an indivisible part of all human rights and fundamental freedoms is essential. Eradication of poverty requires women's involvement in economic and social development and the equal opportunity of women and men in sustainable development. Peace is attainable and is linked inextricably with the advancement of women. The Loretto Women's Network, our sisters in Pakistan working with women and children, our work in education here in the US, equal employment and housing opportunities, funding for loan funds and microfinance, and our UN work with students from Loretto-sponsored schools all echo the platform for action. Community members work locally, nationally, and internationally for the rights of women. We understand the need to hold governments accountable. We continue to work towards the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment here in the US. We see women's rights eroding and can no longer take those rights for granted in the US. We know our voice and our votes matter. We and the UN must continue the work to ensure that the voice and vote of every woman is part of the social, political, and economic fabric across the globe. And now I would like to turn this presentation over to Sally Dunn for a look at the next decade of our work at the United Nations NGO.
Thanks, Kathy. Over the next few slides, I will cover some of the highlights of Loretto at the UN during the first 15 years of the millennium, from the year 2000 to 2015. This time period, as we've already heard, saw Betty Obel, then Mary Peter, and then me as our Loretto UN NGO reps. While Betty served as the UN rep, the two main issues she focused on were peace and disarmament and gender justice. Even before she was named as Loretto's UN rep, Betty was heavily involved in peace and disarmament advocacy and traveled to Stockholm in 1998 to attend the UNESCO conference. She had the wisdom to reach out to Marcella and Eldon and recruit them to expand Loretto's support of the NGO Committee on Disarmament, Peace, and Security. For 8 years, they traveled to New York from their home in Pennsylvania to attend the monthly meetings of this NGO committee and represent Loretto. Listen to this brief interview with Betty. She talks not only about her advocacy for peace and disarmament, but also about her passion for gender justice. And she describes the honor of being present when the International Criminal Court declared rape to be a war crime.
But what were some of your highlights of your time there? What were some of your favorite things, even favorite things about New York as well as about the UN?
I think one of the main highlights was being able to work for the peace groups. Disarmament, peace, and security was really my major focus. And then Marcella and Eldon, I got to know them. They had the peace group in Toronto and with children, and they received some Loretto funds, and then they became leaders in NGO peace and disarmament by doing retreat work for that group. I can't forget the Women's Caucus for Gender Justice, because that was a really an opportunity for me to get to know women's issues. And I worked with a group of female lawyers from all over the country, many of them from the South, who created the Women's Caucus for Gender Justice and ended up with International Criminal Court at the final declaring that rape is a war crime. When the document was signed in Rome, I was there with them. And the applause outside of the building lasted for 5 minutes when the International Criminal Court document was signed.
It was a huge development when the UN finally, in the early part of this century, began to address issues affecting the world's indigenous peoples. The Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, which first met in the year 2002, has met annually since then. A major achievement was the development and adoption of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which established many rights that had previously not been recognized for Indigenous peoples, including one specific and important one, which is called the right to free, prior, and informed consent to any development projects that will affect them or their lands. After lengthy and fierce advocacy by civil society, the declaration was adopted by the General Assembly in 2007, with 144 countries voting yes, 11 abstaining, and only 4 no votes. The no votes came from Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the United States. Shameful, in my opinion. All 4 have since adopted the declaration. Mary Peter worked on many other issues during her 4 years at the UN, women's equality, girls' rights, poverty eradication, among them. But the one near and dear to her heart was Indigenous issues. I wish we had a video of Mary Peter telling us about her work for Indigenous peoples, but here is a short clip of her thoughts about our presence at the UN.
I was lucky enough to be chosen in 2004 for a 4-year term at the United Nations. The thing that was also very wonderful was to be working with women from all over the world. I'll never forget the first time that I was sitting next to a woman. We were talking and I said, "Where are you from?" And she said, "From Timbuktu." And I thought, my goodness, you know, it was just so wonderful that we were sharing the same desire for justice and for peace.
You might recognize the woman between me and Mary Peter, Sister Gloria from Guatemala. My first year as NGO rep in 2008, I invited students from Loretto Academy in El Paso and from Marion Middle School in St. Louis to attend the annual Commission on the Status of Women in March. The CSW focuses on issues affecting women and girls around the world, and it is a great learning experience for our students. Although we concluded that it would probably be better suited for high school students rather than middle schoolers, we deemed it a great success and determined to expand the program in future years. 2008 was the midpoint of the 15-year timeframe for the world to implement the MDGs. So there was much advocating for funds to be made available to achieve these goals. Although substantial progress was made, it was clear by about 2012 or 2013 that they were not going to be met and would need to be replaced by a more ambitious agenda for global sustainable development. Just as an aside, I'll point out that the picture here isn't from the UN. It's a group of us gathered in Washington, D.C. for a week of lobbying with our senators and representatives. We prepared a number of issues and talking points, but in the end, we focused all our efforts on demanding a humanitarian response to the unaccompanied minor humanitarian crisis taking place at our southern border that very week in 2014. Why was our UN rep there? Wasn't I focused on global issues? Yes, of course. Global migration was one of my priority issues. I had traveled to Geneva to attend meetings on the human rights obligations countries have at international borders, especially the rights of undocumented immigrants. And as we all know, every day the United States systematically and intentionally engages in human rights violations along the US-Mexico border. Loretto has been involved in the Working Group on Girls since its founding in 2004. From the beginning and every year since, Loretto's volunteer has played an integral role in the WGG's work. Through and with the WGG, Loretto has helped raise the profile of girls to the point where UN member states have to listen to their needs at least twice a year, during the celebration of the International Day of the Girl in October, and again during the CSW in March. The program to bring high school students to the CSW, which I started in 2009, has greatly expanded over the last decade and is now a well-established service learning trip in each of our high schools. You can see from this picture of our large 2014 delegation that it is a very popular choice for students to make. In fact, each school has established its own process for selecting which students are chosen for the limited slots each year. The most consistent feedback I received from students after they returned home was how it had been a life-changing experience to learn so much about the challenges faced by their peers around the world. It opens their hearts and broadens their horizons, and they are forever changed by it. On this slide of CSW highlights, I included the year LWN coordinators came to New York just because we had so much fun. I know the picture's a little blurry, but I thought you'd enjoy seeing it anyway. We had our picture taken at the US mission after a briefing by President Obama's Global Ambassador for Women. One of the most powerful CSW events Loretto sponsored during my time there was the Girls' Tribunal on Violence Against Girls. We partnered with Rosa Lizarde and the Feminist Task Force, along with the WGG, to have 15 girls from around the world present their personal testimony about the violence in their lives, experienced or witnessed, either through the media or at school or in their communities. A distinguished panel of jurists heard their testimony and responded with their views of what governments and societies need to do to reduce the level of violence girls are subject to. The 3-hour event was standing room only, and the courage, determination, and passion of the witnesses were exceptional and inspired us all. I'm going to play a video of Sarah, who happens to be my great niece, reading into the record the statement of a Mexican girl named Celia. Celia is from Juarez, and Mary Peter had asked her to participate as a witness in the tribunal. Mary Peter helped her prepare her statement, but after a long, frustrating process trying to get a visa to come to New York, Celia's visa was denied in spite of the letters of invitation I had provided from the UN. Not only was her visa denied, but she was insulted by the Customs and Immigration Service officer who said he did not believe anyone at the UN would want to hear anything from a poor Mexican girl. Sarah's reading of Celia's statement takes about 3 minutes, but it's so powerful, I wanted you to hear the whole thing.
Campeche, southeast Mexico in 1994. The next year, my parents immigrated to Ciudad Juarez in search of work in one of the twin plants there. Besides working very hard, my father worked in the evening doing construction work and fixing the small building where we lived. Today, I attend the university and try to work for peace with justice here in Ciudad Juarez. I encounter violence every day. I have not suffered physical violence, but emotionally, it is very hard to go out in the street and not know whether I can trust the people I meet. My mother was attacked on her way to work one day. A man threatened her with a gun, then beat her up, trampled her, and stole her possessions. Even though she yelled for help, no one listened to her. It was very scary. An acquaintance of my father ran into a woman who was dying after having been attacked, even though she was still alive and he might have been able to save her, he was afraid and left her to die. My cousin, who lives in Casas Grandes, Chihuahua, disappeared 3 years ago, and we have not heard from her. Once I saw a girl being beaten by a man. It was scary. I really did not know who the man who was hitting her was, but it was very sad and scary. All of this has made me reflect on the violence. Among several friends at the university, we try to help one another and support one another. Some of my friends walk with me to the bus stop and make sure that I'm safe. Sometimes they escort me home. When I wake up in the morning, I have no idea what will happen that day. I have made it my practice to tell other people that we are humans. We must help one another because each one can do something to make sure that the future will be better. With Father Peter and Sister Betty, who live next to me, I have often spoken to visitors, such as university students and border and merging groups who visit them. Some people think that we are too idealistic. We believe that we can work so that our generation can help our world be a better place. I believe that if we continue to help one another, our future will improve. I would very much hope that we can change the authorities, especially the police in our country. They often are the ones who perpetrate crimes against the people. Today, we cannot trust them. So we are working to have a better situation, and we hope that the young people will help us. I want to thank the people who listened to this message, and thank you all for inviting me. Thank you.
Speaking of powerful tribunals, another highlight of my time at the UN was the Women's Tribunals on Climate Justice in 2012, when we again partnered with Rosa Lizarde, this time to raise the voices of women dealing with the devastating and unjust impacts of dirty coal on their lives. Central Appalachian women gave testimony about the horrific impacts of mountaintop removal coal mining practices in 4 distinct cases which they presented. Number 1, health impacts on women, their families, and their communities. Number 2, poverty, economic injustice, and lack of economic vitality. Number 3, destruction of communities and social disintegration. And number 4, damages to air, land, and water. The women who testified spoke so eloquently of the many generations their families have lived in the Appalachian Mountains. Their strength, determination, and courage were breathtaking. I still remember the final words of one woman, quote, "We don't live where they mine coal. They mine coal where we live." On the outskirts of Chicago, in the shadow of a gigantic coal-fired power plant, women from the community, a predominantly Mexican-American neighborhood, testified about how they have been breathing harmful emissions from 2 of the oldest, dirtiest, and most polluting coal-fired power plants in the nation. The unforgettable quote from this tribunal: "We don't get the power, we just get the pollution." I remember one witness saying she had lived in the neighborhood for several years before she noticed the warning on the back of her monthly water bill in extremely tiny print. It said, "Caution, drinking too much water may be hazardous to your health." Rosa, Emily Thenhouse, our Loretto volunteer, Janet Keating, the executive director of Ohio Valley Environmental Coalition, and I took the results of these tribunals to the Rio+20 Global Conference on Sustainable Development in Rio de Janeiro to use in our advocacy efforts. One more memorable quote from the Central Appalachian Tribunal: "It is not possible to destroy our mountains without destroying us." After Rio+20, and for the next couple of years, the UN held countless meetings and negotiations in the process of developing a global agenda for the next 15 years after the expiration of the MDGs in 2015. There's really no way I can describe for you the relentless work of civil society to insert ourselves into the discussions. But in the end, all the long hours and hard work were worth it. We were successful with 2 of our top priorities: getting member states to agree to a human rights framework for the SDGs, and getting the UN for the first time to declare access to safe drinking water and sanitation to be a human right. When I first arrived at the UN in 2008, fairly often I would be in an NGO committee meeting discussing some topic when someone would mention human rights as a rationale. Immediately, others in the room would caution that we in civil society need to not mention human rights in any oral or written presentations we might make. The member states in New York refused to discuss human rights, saying it belonged at the Human Rights Council in Geneva. And now here they were, a mere 7 years later, declaring water to be a human right. Whenever I hear someone say the UN is useless, all they do is talk, it's all words and no action, I tell this story of seeing progress when the UN declared water to be a human right. We celebrated this victory with all the women from the women's tribunals who testified about their polluted water. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jax, our current Loretto volunteer at the UN.
Thank you, Sally. Hi, everyone. My name is Jax Wiedeschnick, and I am the current Loretto volunteer with Loretto at the UN. This is such an exciting placement to have, as I get to be really close to the UN, as well as all the social justice issues that I am passionate about. A little bit about me. I'm originally from Portland, Oregon, and I attended an all-girls high school, also named St. Mary's Academy, like the Loretto School here in Denver, where I live. I attended Gonzaga University and studied English and International Relations and graduated with honors. During my time in college, I was a part of many clubs and internships about grassroots organizing and women's rights advocacy. Being the assistant UN rep is an amazing opportunity, and it has been incredible to interact with the past Loretto volunteers and see where they've gone in this field and beyond. Here are some photos of past Loretto volunteers. Many of them have pursued graduate degrees at top universities and programs and are continuing groundbreaking work in the NGO sphere at the UN. This year, I'm remote in Denver, but I really enjoyed my time in New York just a few weeks ago this last fall. I cannot wait to go back in the spring and actually enter the UN. Now, here's a video from our past Loretto volunteers talking about their experience. How did your Loretto volunteer year with Loretto at the UN influence your life and your career?
So much. I mean, I knew before my year with Loretto at the UN that I was interested in working in international policymaking, but the support and the encouragement that I received from Sally Dunn, who was the Loretto NGO representative at the time, and really the whole Loretto community, their support was just so important to me. They created an environment that both respected the skills that I already had, but also really pushed me to grow and develop further, to step outside of my comfort zone and experience new things. And I really never felt like I was just the intern, right? I was able to really fully contribute the skills that I had, the analysis and writing and planning and organization skills that I had as an equal member of the team. And the work that I did in the Loretto at the UN office and the connections that I made there directly led to my next job and the one after that. And so now I'm in my 8th year at the United Nations, and I'm still representing communities of women religious around the world and the lay mission partners and grassroots communities that work with them. It really opened my eyes to the role of civil society in policymaking spaces. Through school and through work experience, knew a lot about the role of governments in international policymaking, of course, but there's this whole parallel side to policymaking, and the role of civil society is just so important in that process. It's just so critical and important for us to be here to represent our values, to challenge governments, to uphold their commitments, and address the issues that we care about, like poverty and human trafficking, migration, homelessness, water and sanitation, climate change, just so many others. I mean, this is a role that is vital, but also that we are particularly well suited for. We're really not afraid to go to the heart of the matter. That was something that the Loretto community at the UN really instilled in me, how important it is to raise the issues that affect people and planet the most, to remain aware and vigilant, but also patient and determined in order to achieve change.
One of the highlights of that first Commission on the Status of Women, so that would have happened in March of 2009. There was a student, a young girl. I think she was in middle school. Her name was Grace. We went to a session, so a meeting at the commission, from the Commission on the Status of Women. And we were having sort of a debriefing session to talk about what we heard and, how that felt. And I remember saying, you might feel sad or, upset. And we were talking about that. And she was like, I'm not sad. I'm angry that this stuff is happening to girls my age and no one told me, I'm just now learning about it. I think that being angry isn't something that women or girls are always sort of allowed to be. And I just really loved her, the sort of the space the community was able to create to allow her to be angry, upset, and passionate about changing something that she felt like wasn't just. I think back to her, that sort of fire that Loretto ignited in her through the UN to work for justice.
Now I'm going to be handing it off to Beth, who's going to be talking about the work that she's been doing and that we are working on currently.
Thanks so much, Jax. And it was indeed a pleasure to be in New York City with you a few weeks ago. I too am excited for you to come again in the spring. And I must say, filling the large shoes left behind by Sally, it has been quite a ride these past 4 years. With a political administration here in the US that's not been particularly helpful in terms of international perspectives and multilateralism, we've done what we can to bring forward the climate crisis as our framing context and continued our work focusing on women and girls, education for global citizenship, as well as climate-induced migration. We've continued working with our schools and some of the schools through the BVMs as well, the Sisters of Charity of the Blessed Virgin Mary of Dubuque, Iowa, and hosted nearly 200 people at the annual Commission on the Status of Women, or CSW, meetings that have occurred during this time period. In order to build upon the framework that Sally created, we've developed a curriculum to better educate and orient people to the world of the United Nations, because it's an exceedingly complex entity. We've also developed modules about the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, and the context and the work of the Commission on the Status of Women. It's truly been an honor and a privilege to be leading our UN office during this time, and I am so excited to continue learning about the possibilities of relationship between the Loretto community and the United Nations. I would like to note, however, we wouldn't have been able to accomplish half of what we've done in the past 3 decades without our Loretto volunteers and many, many interns. We are so grateful for our interns, most of whom have come from these colleges and universities. These folks, mostly young women, have taken on tasks ranging from taking notes at meetings to creating social media posts to representing Loretto at events during the annual High Level Political Forum, or HLPF, which happens in July every year. So you can hear things in their own words. We're going to play 2 short clips for you from interns sharing about what they learned and how each intern experience helped them to succeed and build necessary life skills. First, we'll have Anna Farber, who just graduated this past spring from Oberlin College. She's the person on the left in the top photo.
During my summer at the UN, I learned about how within a larger institution, it's smaller groups of committed people that make it work. The civil society community of which Loretto is a part is full of wonderful, hardworking people who, for the most part, do all of their work behind the scenes. These are the people who do the research to support progressive ideals, who apply pressure to member states in ways that aren't politically feasible for other states to do. the UN is really propelled forward by civil society, who are just regular people who often go unsung. So it was invaluable to my experience this summer to learn about how broad the UN community is. And it really expanded my view of the UN in a way that no classroom-based learning ever has.
And next, we have Emma Patton, a graduate of Narings Hall High School in St. Louis, who graduated from New York University, NYU, in 2020. She's the person in the middle on the bottom photo.
I got to see a lot of women in leadership. I got to see the women at Loretto at the UN and Loretto in the larger community doing cool work, working with what they care about. I got to see that it was a community that existed all across the country and really was trying to make a difference. And I think it has influenced me, in addition to my experience at Narings, and empowering me as a woman, a student, and as a leader. So right now in my senior year, I'm serving as the president of NYU's College of Arts and Science, which means I have a constituency of almost 8,000 students, which is very cool, a lot of responsibilities. I meet with deans, I meet with administrators, I meet with like the student body at large, and I think it's an experience I would not have been empowered to do, had the confidence or the skills to take on if it wasn't for my experience at Narings and my experience with Loretto at the UN.
These interns have helped our office grow and evolve over the years. We estimate that we've hosted nearly 30 interns over the past 30 years, and fortunately, we're still in touch with many of them. Of course, things got a bit strange early on in 2020 with the COVID-19 pandemic. We are so grateful that we've long used Zoom in Loretto, as we were able then to pivot and do many of our programs successfully online. And we're deeply grateful to the Sisters of Charity of the Blessed Virgin Mary of Dubuque, Iowa, because they adapted right with us. The image on this slide is of several Lorettos joining BVM sisters and friends to discuss the 75th anniversary of the United Nations in September 2020. We discussed what we thought the UN had done well and what we'd like to see from the United Nations in the future. We then submitted a report to the UN about the conversation and our perspectives as part of their campaign on their 75th anniversary to hear from civil society. Now it's our 30th anniversary, and we're also celebrating just over 10 years of working with the BVMs. Here's a clip we'd like to share from Sister Roberta White in Dubuque to lend a BVM perspective.
My name is Sister Roberta White, and I'm a BVM Sister of Charity of the Blessed Virgin Mary. So about 10 years ago, our president, Sister Marianne Zollman, became aware of the Lorettos at the UN, and she suggested to our community and our leadership that we would be wonderful for us BVMs to be able to get in contact with Loretto at the UN and be able to attend this, especially the Commission on the Status of Women in the World, and support Loretto at the UN. So she sponsored our leadership to give a grant to Loretto at BVM, Loretto at the UN, and we have had a BVM representative there with the Lorettos for the last 9 or 10 years. And 3 years ago, I came in and was able to then, as being retired, be able to be a rep and be able to attend the March meeting every year and to bring students from our schools, some BVMs, some associates and teachers, to experience the Commission on the Status of Women, where over 10,000 women from all over the world come to share their insights and their problems and their conflicts and struggles with human rights for women and girls. So it has been a most wonderful, stretching amazing experience. And I'm very blessed to have had this opportunity the last 3 years. So I thank you, Loretto's, for this special connection with UN women all over the world and the UN keeping in touch with what's going on in the United Nations. So I thank you very much.
We're deeply grateful for this collaboration and look forward to building on past work as we welcome BVM Sister Gwen Ferry into the UN Connector role. With deep thanks to both Mary Martins and Roberta White for their time of service. Now, this presentation is just the start of our 30th anniversary, and this is where we need each of you to play a role. We would love your assistance with helping us collect more memories this year. And deep thanks to each of you who have already agreed to be interviewed or have even been interviewed already. We will be presenting more fabulous videos that have not yet been completed, and our plan is to present them in the coming months. Also, we've created a Google form. I'll show you a screenshot in just a moment, but we're also open to coming to you via phone, email, WhatsApp, or even in person if requested. We'd be happy to receive your memories, photos, stories, and even your buttons if anyone still has a Going Global button on hand. This slide is simply a screenshot of the top of our Google form. There's a beautiful butterfly on it as well. So you can see what it looks like. And when you actually go there, you can scroll down to tell us your memory or story and let us know whether or not you might wish to be interviewed, and answer the question about whether or not you have photos or other UN artifacts that you might wish to share. I'd like to give a huge public shout out to Pat McCormick in Denver, who is our first respondent to the survey this fall. Thank you, Pat. As we move forward into what the United Nations calls the Decade of Action to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, we're working on several projects. We are digitizing the archives of the Working Group on Girls and our own archives as well. Our summer interns, Abishri and Claire, began a project mapping the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, along with the Laudato Si Action Plan goals, to various Loretto projects where we've accomplished or are achieving those goals from both of those programs. So we're forging a new collaboration as well. We are absolutely thrilled to finally be joining the Justice Coalition of Religious, or JCOR, a collaborative entity of Catholic groups working together around the globe to bring a collective voice to our work at the United Nations. JCOR has grown out of RUN, Religious at the UN, and both our former UN representative, Sally Dunn, and our former Loretto volunteer, Teresa Blumenstein, have played key roles in its birth, formation, and growth. In the work that we do, we're also deeply grateful for the energy of the Loretto Volunteer Program, for our interns, for our BVM colleagues, and for our advisory committee. I'd like to thank former advisory committee members, Kathy Baldwin-Heitman, Libby Como, Peggy Green, and Alice Kitchen for their service, and also recognize Anna Koop, Mary Helen Sandoval, and Betsy Kloot for their continued support. We're always seeking new folks to join in, and we only meet quarterly, so please do let us know if you have interest. We're going to continue to do some great things, and we're also learning more and more each day about the power of social media, because at least for now, our work with the United Nations continues primarily online. I'd like to wrap up with gratitude to our interview and presentation team, which included our wonderful summer 2021 interns, Abishri Nath and Claire Schmelzer, and give a special shout out to the person behind the scenes, Tara Suri, our amazing video editor and future videographer. We're now happy to take questions and enter into a time of discussion. And we also welcome your brief comments.